welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about the true objective of Republicans when it comes to cutting government. And, of course, we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But hey, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump to our daily debate. This is where I ask you a question. So, throw in the comment sections what you believe the proper purview of a government is. What are the maximums, the minimums? What do they have to do? What shouldn't they do? What's the most they should do? That sort of thing. I want to know everybody's idea here because some people believe that government has a social responsibility and some other people believe it's simply there to regulate the system as it is and be an oversight rather than an active member. And this actually gets to the core of the argument that the author in this article from Counterpunch, the headline reads, "It's a lie to say Republicans want to destroy the federal government. They just want to get rid of the things that don't help them get rich." Now, I think that the ethos, the perspective that the author is coming from here is well-founded. And what I mean by that is they're coming at it from a very genuine perspective. I also think that they misunderstand a lot of the right nowadays. And that is not to say that my brand of understanding of the right is the utmost understanding of the right. That would be childish and it would be immature of me to say that I have a better understanding than anybody else. But the actual ethos, the actual idea, the strand of logic that underrides all of the Republican ideology on limiting government is very well described. That doesn't mean that every single person, that doesn't mean every person that voted for Trump, that every person that supports MAGA actually believes in the same Republican underlying idea of limited government. That is not to say that is true, but the idea of limited government that has undergirded a lot of Republican thinking throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and the 2000s. And let's be clear, I know there are always exceptions to that. There is always a place where they're willing to expand the government because we are people. We are not true ideologues. We don't just sit there as apparitions and say, oh, well, these are the absolute truths of our existence and we're going to stick to them. No, we are people who are practical in nature, who are willing to bend and break and shift, especially politicians, in order to please our constituents or even to use government as a tool in order to benefit us. But the underlying idea of limited government does have a few strains that need to be properly explored here that the author gives some credit to and then also seems to underlie some misconceptions when he's going through. So, quote, "Many liberal types are all too willing to accept the latter claim. The idea is that Musk and his crew somehow want a world without government. This is self-serving crap that no one who is not on his team should ever accept. These self-identified imagined libertarians want government for all sorts of things. The small grain of truth to the story is that they don't want government social programs that help people who are not rich. Musk's view is that the government should only be there to make him and his fellow billionaires richer." End quote. Now, is that actually true? Does he have a underlying ethos or an underlying belief that the government should only be there to serve him? I don't know if that's necessarily true. He understands that there's public goods. He understands that, and this is obviously extrapolating from things that I've read about Musk, whether it be a few different biographies, whether it be about the founding of Tesla, all these different reference points. And that doesn't mean that he's the same man he was at any of those points. But the idea I'm getting at is that while he is willing to take the government money, especially in the form of Tesla and some of these credits, or he's willing to take government contracts because they're the only people that are actually have a use for his satellite technology and his rocket technology. He does want private equity in these companies, and he wants to ensure that they can operate on a completely private basis. He wants to maintain control of his company, reap the rewards of it, reap the money in SpaceX particularly, because Tesla is public, and he wants to be able to actually have it be commercially viable, not just from the government. Now, does that mean that he believes he's entitled to some sort of government contract? I don't think he's entitled. He does believe that it's beneficial to him and he wants them to keep providing them because that's how he's making his money. But I don't think he sits there and says, I am entitled to these, except maybe under the understanding that he has the best rocket technology right now. Blue Origin is doing well, but they have lost multiple contracts, and Bezos comes up and says, well, basically, hey, you should actually pay attention to what we're saying here. You need to actually give us a contract. And Elon Musk basically goes back and forth saying, well, hey, your technology is not as good. So I don't think he believes that he's entitled to much of anything. Then again, I don't have the insight to the man directly. I don't talk to him on a normal basis. But the idea that he is getting at, the author here, not necessarily Elon Musk, when talking about how Elon does want to cut the state in particular areas, of course that is true. He wants to cut in places that don't necessarily affect him. Did you see him going in, and he wouldn't be able to as Doge anyway, but is see him going into the appropriations process for military contracts? Then again, a lot of this is handled through Congress, and it's not necessarily something the executive can get hands-on of. Exactly. There are, of course, regulations that could change and things like that, and there are definitely agencies that oversee certain things. Like EPA would be a good one when it comes to standards of anything that's being emitted in the environment. So he could change things about the FFA, he could change things about the EPA, because these are all the branches of the executive, whereas appropriations for military, sometimes he wouldn't be able to go in and say, hey, we need to cut this funding program because it's already been appropriated by Congress. And then again, there would be some pushback about that, but yes, those are things that he would be actively seeking to actually use to his advantage and say, hey, we want to cut this money here so it's freed up in order to pay for future space exploration, that it's able to pay for more bringing in of manufacturing or more credits for manufacturing of electric cars or just cars in general in the United States, considering that we are already a pretty protectionist market when it comes to our EVs and even our cars in general, and the fact that we can't necessarily put up with competition from around the world, he would probably not be necessarily opposed, especially with some of the new rumblings about Chinese car manufacturers in the EV space, that they could probably bring in protections. I haven't seen him make a direct statement on it. Then again, I don't listen or watch every single thing he puts out on Twitter, but the point being that yes, the author is right when saying that Elon Musk, as any individual, is individually motivated. He has his pursuits. Where I want to actually drill down on this author's perspective and misunderstanding of the limited government philosophy. While he does characterize Elon Musk a little bit differently, and he says, oh, these are people that want no government, the libertarian fantasy, the conservative believes that there is a good place for a instance of government, whether it be as a judicial system that actually enforces private property. One great example, and you can go read this for yourself, the link will be in the description below, like and subscribe button, but one great example is the author says, well, billionaires, millionaires, even normal people would have issues if we gotten rid of the copyright and patent process, which is administrated through the U.S. government. That is a form of government that they would not be okay with taking away because it directly benefits them, and that is fair enough. Then again, that is enforcing the idea that there is private property that needs to be protected from any individual, and the government is an institution that facilitates a social interaction between individuals who live in a community and provides a safe haven for anyone who wants to own, build, and maintain their property. So that's a really convoluted way of saying that these private property maintenance sort of agreements, or these tools that are meant to protect private property, they can be built around a judicial system and a small bureaucratic system and a legislator that all work in tandem in order to protect the rights of the individual rather than encroaching on them from the government. All that can be done and it be a limited government. And that is closer, and that is, let's be clear, it's pure fantasy. It would never be able to actually be implemented because of the nature of having partisans and different people from different parties and people who have their own agendas. They want their own type of spending in there, which is sometimes why it might be actually important to have a person who comes in and says, let's cut it all and restart, because at the end of the day, how does the joke go? Once the law gets on the books, it almost never comes back unless it has a sunsetting clause. So one of the examples actually is Trump's tax cuts. They're coming back up on the books. But once the law is in, it's very hard to give something to the American people and then rip it away. But if we're to look beyond the world in which it could possibly happen and everybody's happy that there's no government, or there's a pure conservative vision of government where it's very limited, there is still a philosophy that undergirds Republicans that doesn't necessarily have to be idealistic. And what I mean by that is, it has to be the absolute ideal, but where we can cut spending where it is not necessary anymore. We are a giant system that is constantly trying things. We have programs running across multiple states, all the states, and this is funded by their own tax dollars, and we can test and try different policies and see what works. And in order for that actual method to be effective, we have to be willing to cut things. We have to be willing to cut and limit the scope of the government and try to implement things that are the least invasive to the population while also protecting their individual rights. So there is a system that can be built. There's a very simple governing structure that protects private property, that enables a free market, that does not necessarily get interfered with by the government. The average day lives of people should not be touched by the government at all, in theory. Of course, that never happens because even at the beginning times when we had limited government, we had lots of tariffs in place. We had a very protectionist tariff policy in order to make sure that our domestic markets were able to grow and thrive and we were able to build industry. I'm not trying to pretend as though, once again, it's not an ideal world that we're living in, but to mischaracterize the conservative movement as one that believes in no government and then to use that as a straw man in order to actually take down their ideology and poke holes in it, it is a little bit disingenuous, and it needed to be disabused, or at least he needed to be disabused of these notions. And that's why I wanted to talk about it. I also wanted to bring these ideas to you because at the end of the day, it's all about bringing relevant stories, and this obviously has the Elon Musk stuff. It has a modern conservative movement. It has the philosophy of conservatives. There are lots of different elements here that I thought would be interesting, and that's why we brought this one to the table. But with all that said, let's jump to our daily delight. And, normally I like to have these primed up and ready to go. But today we're just going to flip through the queue together. And it's the first one that shows up is Mitten and Pants. Lands third run at CBC and Sky Kids Peacock Bags Season 2. So apparently there's a childhood show that's all about a cat and a dog. It looks absolutely adorable. I actually have seen some clips on YouTube before. So if you want to go read a little bit more about it, see some of the cute photos from the show, hear about where they're going to be putting this sort of stuff out, like I said earlier, the links will be in the description. That's also the other article we talked about. They'll be below the like and subscribe button. Also down there you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post the links directly to this video on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the 6 and 6, which comes out on Tuesday and Thursday, which is 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. It's our international news segment. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.